Marnus Labuschagne has been one of the most consistent test batters of this decade, or at least that's what the numbers would suggest if you have a look at his overall test career. He's amassed nearly 5,000 test runs in 63 test matches at an average of 44 with 11 hundreds and 25 50s. And the volume of runs speaks for itself, right? Because since his debut in test cricket, he's been the highest run scorer for Australia and second highest in the world only to Joe Root. So at the surface level, what you see is a batter who's been doing well consistently for Australia, has been scoring tons and tons of runs for them. But the moment you look at the headlines today, you realize that Marnus Labuschagne has not scored a single test century in almost the last 3 years. So how do both of these things end up being true at the same time? Labuschagne wasn't supposed to be this player. When Australia first picked him, he was averaging just 37 in domestic first-class cricket. Inside Australia, specifically in the Sheffield Shield, he was averaging still below 35. He'd got just 4 centuries from over 60 innings that he played at the first-class level. And the only reason he even got a chance to play for Australia at the time was because David Warner, Steve Smith, as well as Cameron Bancroft were serving their bans. Of course, he was also someone who could bowl leg spin, and Tim Paine at the time coming in as a new captain really liked Marnus Labuschagne. But as expected, his test debut with the bat was mostly lackluster. Cut to the February of 2019 when Australia was starting to pick their squad for the Ashes that was to take place in England. Marnus being in and around the squad might have fancied his chances. But his Shield returns of 36, 0, 0, 36, 3, 2 and 26 meant that for him to actually get picked in the squad was just going further and further away. Firstly, him getting signed up for Glamorgan almost as an afterthought. And secondly, a conversation that he had with his childhood coach around trusting the processes of his batting. The Glamorgan stint seemed to unlock something in him. Because what was a fact known about Marnus at the time was that he was a heavily offside dominant player. But the moment he came into the county side, one of the things that the then coach Matthew Maynard wanted to focus on was expanding Marnus's leg side game. And he wanted to do this because a lot of bowlers would target the stumps, meaning that Marnus would not be able to get a lot of runs away. Something that was needed to ensure that you weren't stuck up on one end. Maynard was of the opinion that Marnus was not stable enough in terms of where his foot movement was. And what this was causing is his backlift to come all the way from gully, which was not only ruining his balance, but also affecting how he batted on the leg side. But the second more important aspect that came into play was just the mental side of things and the importance of run scoring. Labuschagne's childhood coach believed that he'd always had the talent. He'd showed that he could score runs at the childhood level, but something that was a constant problem with him was that he would throw his wicket away. This full county stint at Glamorgan would ensure that not only would he get a lot of red ball practice all at once, but he would also get sufficient amount of match time. Essentially, Marnus not only realized the importance of practicing and putting in all of the hard work while playing red ball cricket, but also the importance of the currency of runs. Because in the second division playing for Glamorgan that season, he ended up as the second highest run scorer in the tournament. In just the 10 matches that he played that season, he amassed 1,114 runs. At an average of 65.5 with 500s and 550s to his name, Marnus had clearly broken open the door. While the runs were one thing, the conditions in which he scored these runs and also the timing of it was extremely important. Because it happened right before the Ashes that were going to take place in England. And although Marnus had not done well in the Sheffield Shield itself, all of his runs here accounted for the fact that he would then be picked into that Ashes squad. Now, I don't really need to talk about the Ashes debut that Marnus Labuschagne had. All of the theatre and drama around it, the fact that he came in as a concussion substitute for Steve Smith, who'd been scoring heaps and heaps of runs. An opportunity that Labuschagne would not have expected, but for one which he was completely ready. Because despite getting hit on the helmet and falling down on the very first delivery, he got right back up. And that was testament to the kind of mental steel that this player was made up of. And what followed in that Ashes and also a couple of years later into his test career was all of the potential that his childhood coach had seen in him and all of the potential for which he was picked in the squad. From there, the runs simply would not stop. In the 2019-20 home summer, Labuschagne scored 896 runs at an astonishing average of 112, including a stint where he had 3 back-to-back test centuries. For a man who at the start of Jan 2020 was averaging just 20 in test cricket, by the end of that year, his average had shot up to 63. At his absolute peak, in fact, he was second only to Don Bradman. For any player who'd scored at least 2,000 runs in test cricket, first was Don Bradman, of course, and the next on that list in terms of batting averages was Marnus Labuschagne. And so so for a man of that caliber, with someone who'd had a start that was compared to that of Bradman, what eventually happened to Marnus Labuschagne? Now, it is no secret that Marnus Labuschagne's returns have diminished drastically, because in almost the last 3 years, he's not got a single test century. In fact, the last time he scored a test century was way back in 2023. Something's changed in these last couple of years that quite literally has made Marnus just half the batter that he used to be. It came to a stage where he was even dropped from the Australian squad for the West Indies series, and only after the failures of a couple of batters and the retirement of Usman Khawaja was he recalled into the squad. Even now, he seems to be in a place wherein he's almost holding on to dear life for a position in that playing 11, even a 15 at times. For people who watched him bat in this time frame, it feels like a lot of the magic is lost. And it is almost so ironic, because here's a man who we know from the outside, and even just looking at all the footage that we have, is someone who's obsessed with cricket, who's obsessed with batting. Yet for a man who constantly would scream no run, ironically or rather paradoxically, he's struggling to actually get any runs. And it is here that we start to look at his career in two halves. To further contextualize his numbers and see what really happened, we look at Marnus Labuschagne's numbers in two parts. One from his debut until he scored his last test century, and the other from his last test century to the present day. And you can see how stark the contrast is, because in his first 43 test matches, Marnus Labuschagne averaged 53.3 in test cricket. This included 11 centuries and 16 half centuries in just 76 innings, meaning that he would essentially score a 50 plus score once at least every 3 innings. Whereas across his last 20 tests, Marnus Labuschagne has just averaged 26.6 and hasn't got a single test century. And if you're an Australian cricket fan or someone who's followed Australian cricket for a little bit, you know that this is an ongoing conversation. You know that a lot of people are talking about Marnus Labuschagne consistently getting starts but ending up getting out and just looking very scratchy in his innings. And so from where we could analyze it, it seems to come down to 3 main reasons. So for starters, we looked at how many times Marnus Labuschagne was getting out between the scores of 0 and 19. In the first period where Labuschagne was in his batting peak, he got out between a score of 0 and 19 22 out of 71 times, which basically means that he was dismissed for a score of less than 20 about 31% of the times. Whereas since then, or if you look at the second period of test matches, this number has more than doubled. Because of the 34 times he's been dismissed during this period, 23 times he's been dismissed for a score between 0 and 19, a whopping 67.6% of the times. Which means that more than a conversion problem, it seems that Marnus is not even getting set. And so what this would naturally mean is that either the bowlers are bowling better or he's simply lost out on form. Which is where we decided to look up at his numbers versus different bowling types. And the one thing that immediately stands out when you see this chart is that Marnus Labuschagne's game against pace has diminished considerably. Because versus right arm fast, his average has dropped from 45.3 to just 22.7. But even versus the right arm medium pacers, a bowling type that he would regularly dominate, his averages have come down from 75.7 to just in the mid-20s. If anything, his game against spin has actually gotten better, despite the fact that he was already good at playing spin. And that clearly means that there's a problem in how he's facing up against pace. In fact, according to an analysis done by CricViz's Ben Jones back in December of 2024, there's a couple of things that stand out. For starters, Labuschagne has really struggled against the good length seaming deliveries. Because where he used to average 70 plus when he was at his batting peak, that number at that point in time had come down to just 14. Which basically means that the length which was bread and butter for him to score runs off, he was now consistently getting out to that. But along with that, even his forward press seems to be impacted. Because where in his batting peak, he would be on the front foot more than 50% of the times, that number has come down to a shadow of what it used to be at just 17%. Clearly showing that he's a batter now in doubt of his own foot movement and not knowing which deliveries to come forward to. Even the number of times he's able to play his favorite shot, the cover drive, and get runs off has reduced from 1 in every 10 to 15 deliveries to 1 in every 31 deliveries. And apparently even his off-stump awareness has gone down. Because at his batting peak, where he was really good at leaving deliveries even slightly outside the off-stump, he's now not as sure, because he's leaving deliveries confidently only when they're at least a foot wider than the stumps. And the third reason, and something that a lot of people might tend to overlook, is that Marnus is essentially batting in the toughest place in Test cricket. Not only by virtue of the conditions that he's currently playing in, which is Australia, but also the fact that he's batting at number 3, the toughest position in Test cricket today. Of the last 20 Test matches that he's played in this second period, 15 of them have come at home, basically in the toughest batting conditions. And not just Marnus, but also a lot of his other contemporaries, someone like a Steve Smith, Travis Head, or even someone like Usman Khawaja, all of their numbers have dropped in these two time periods. But where it's still under 15% in terms of batting averages for Head as well as Smith, that number's changed by 42% for Khawaja, who was eventually dropped and then retired from the squad, and 60% for Marnus Labuschagne. Honestly, it's still a surprise that he's managed to be retained by the squad. And essentially, that's what's been happening. Marnus Labuschagne got off to one of the best starts that we've seen in the history of Test cricket. It's clear that teams have now not only figured out where exactly to bowl to him, but his batting itself seems to be a shadow of its former self. It is the currency of runs and the kind of time that he spent in the middle that has usually helped Marnus score a lot of runs at the highest level. With Australia scheduled to play at least 20 Test matches in this coming year, this could be make or break for Marnus Labuschagne's career. At 32, he's definitely not getting younger. But maybe, just maybe in a manner similar to how he'd done at Glamorgan with that extended run, playing a lot of red ball cricket and just trusting his process, if he's able to do that through this batting period, provided Australia back him and he's getting the runs, then we might see him get a second wind. Because if not, then it's probably curtains on what has been a very interesting Test career. A career of two halves, a career that started and eventually reached a peak crescendo, and one that will end almost like a lot of careers have ended in the recent past. This has been our video on Marnus Labuschagne. If you've enjoyed this, definitely leave your comments down below. Let us know what you think of this video, what you think about Marnus Labuschagne's batting, and hit that like button, share this with your friends. Most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Also get memberships, because that's where we are having some really interesting conversations with really interesting people. Thank you so much for watching. Peace.
What factors are you looking at that you will only get from Bronco that you had to change the whole system?
A lot of people are talking about a lot of injuries.
Like, we are fine, let's put him into the practice matches. Let's see how he's doing during the practice matches with the same intensity. So we try to replicate what he does.
He's an SNC who was part of the UP Ranji squad, the UP Premier League, the UP State side, and then he was also part of the COE for a bit.
It really depends when it comes to COE, like why are you even there? We would set up a protocol which initially would be head by the physio, saying that this is the checklist and this is the protocol that would happen. Now, Shubman Gill has been in system for quite some time, right? He did under 16s and under 19s. Even though we would see him for the very first time on the TV, we have enough of data which we have collected when he was quite young, right?
We had this quartet of fast bowlers with Shami, Bumrah, Ishant Sharma, Bhuvneshwar Kumar at some point, Umesh Yadav at some point. They went through years and years bowling a lot of overs, playing across formats without any injuries, or let's just say a lot of them didn't get injured at the same time.
The athletes that were passed on to me was like 4 female athletes, right? And all of them had their own injury aspect. A lot of female athletes across the domains and across the sports, they tend to have a lot of ACL and the PCL injuries, right?
So then let's take the example of someone like a Hardik Pandya who's gotten injured. He's come to the COE. What are the steps that helps him make sure he's not only going through the rehab?
When a body goes over that load, let's say 8 times your body weight on each delivery, and we are talking about 16,000 deliveries for Indian cricket team, like which is recorded. What about the practice session that he does? What about the IPL matches that he plays? What about the practice sessions even over there, like the warm-up deliveries? So there's a lot more than 16,000 deliveries. We started speaking about workload management for Bumrah was after his injury. Why not before it? How many times Stark has pulled out of IPL?
What is your take on the entire testing and the new criteria for players' fitness being changed?
Okay, let's take an example of Priyanka Patil, right? Was she really injured from the fitness point of view, or was she just got injured because of bad luck? In an ideal day, he might just bowl, let's say, 6 overs, followed by, let's say, about 45 minutes of batting and then 45 minutes of fielding. The player is saying he needs a break. What do you think?